Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
A little fisticuffs and road racing at Pocono. We go from the 2.5 tricky triangle to the short flat track with high tire wear at Richmond. Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by racing analyst and professional bettor Chris Werme. And Wormser, a little golf clap for you and fill-in host Derek Yoder. You boys did an excellent job, other than a minor snafu here or there with technical issues from Derek's end and you falling asleep 2 weeks ago, not being able to remember a best bet that did cash it loud.
Yeah, that was, I just shorted out. I think just the simulation froze and Derek's like, hey, you're doing a podcast. Did you want to finish your sentence?
I mean, that apparently was your Mitch McConnell moment. So as long as you didn't have a stroke while standing up, I mean, we're in good shape. At least your exactly. Bandwidth is there. Your mental health is still intact, and we feel a little bit better about it. But no, you guys did an excellent job. Knew it was going to be in good hands. Can't thank Derek enough for stepping in and filling, my relatively small shoes and lobbing softballs at the rim for you to break down all the racing action.
Yeah, Derek did a great job, and obviously he's someone that I talk to, multiple times a week and certainly before the races. So it wasn't like it was this super difficult transition, but just Derek is very passionate about the sport, and so it's great to have someone that can come in and reliably fill in and do a good job.
I know Derek listens every week, so I'll take a jab here before we get things rolling and lay out the format and all of that. I mean, Derek apparently took the creative liberties to go into Xfinity and trucks in one of the episodes. I wasn't sure what the hell was going on here. I mean, Derek, this is an audience that has to start with its training wheels, and we bring them along slowly. But we do know the other series get plenty of recognition, and hopefully we see the betting markets on those continue to grow. For those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, we break things up around these parts. Stage one, a little bit of a race recap, relatively short for the things that we learned apparently from last weekend at Pocono and what we can apply going forward. Probably not a whole heck of a lot other than if we're setting odds, Ryan Preece would be a favorite over Corey LaJoie should they get into the octagon going head to head. Stage two, we shove a little bit of betting basics down your throat. An interesting discussion that Worm and I have on tap for today, talking about the efficiency in the NASCAR market. And of course, stage three, the most important, a full comprehensive race breakdown as we go to Richmond 2 a little bit earlier this year on the NASCAR schedule than when we went there in August last year, a race that Chris, Derek, and I were all in attendance together. But Chris, Pocono, you texted me during practice. You go, Denny Hamlin has an absolute rocket ship. We had to go through the nonsense that is practice group A and practice group B to try and normalize some of the data. Lo and behold, a little bit of strategy, a little bit of rough racing, but it's the 11 getting his 7th victory at Pocono. And unlike 2022, this one actually counted.
This one counted. And do you want my rant about the race now, or do you want me to wait till after we talk about Hamlin and Larson?
No, I mean, if you want, you can give it a little race rant. I mean, I'm going to put you on the clock. It's not quite the damaged vehicle clock, but we'll let you run it where you want to take it.
I thought this race was trash. It wasn't even racing. It was cars driving around in a circle and pitting when they needed fuel. There was no pass for the lead outside of just a restart. It was brutal to watch. And there was 0 tire fall off and 0 passing. I thought that it was like you just had to be perfect on pit road. Now, yeah, it was important to have a fast car, and that doesn't hurt. But from a racing perspective, there was nothing side by side. There was no, outside of just Larson slipping up, this race just was a big nothing burger to me. We can honestly use nothing of it moving forward. We can't even take this. I mean, even to Michigan, I don't even think that we can kind of take that. It's just like a race that, okay, I'm glad that's over with. We don't have to work our way backwards in a non-road course race. Like just, and here's the thing. NASCAR should thank their lucky stars that Kyle Larson got loose and Denny Hamlin was able to get up, because then, Jeff Gluck's "was it a good race" poll, like 85% of the people said it was a good race, when if that didn't happen, it would have been a shit race. It was at least my least favorite race
polls,
in years.
Honestly, for those polls that Jeff Gluck does, you can boil it down to the last 20 laps of the race. I mean, you could have the most exciting race for 90% of it, and if nothing happens in the final 20 laps, people go, this race sucked, and the race could be complete trash. But if you get a pass for the lead, or you get some wrecks or all sorts of nonsense late, people think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, well, I was not in that camp. I sat there bored the entire day, and it was, I just don't like that track. I think if you have fall off, I mean, it used to be a great track when there was some fall off, but I think Goodyear just screwed the pooch, and obviously no fall off, and pretty much a boring race. And I'm so glad it's over.
Now, one thing I will say, if the on-track product didn't exactly exceed our expectations, NASCAR and the team at Pocono at least did a great job selling out the venue and creating buzz around a track that, for the last handful of years, to your point, the on-track product wasn't overly great, and the atmosphere around the race wasn't that much better. So whatever they did this year, you get a golf clap for that and doing things the right way. Maybe there are other tracks that can kind of let them lead by example, but you're exactly right. I don't think there was a ton to take away from what we saw on track. Now, the biggest storylines, we mentioned Larson and Hamlin. We can get to that. I think you have to discuss Toyota finishing first, second, third, fifth, and sixth overall in that particular race. You had a little bit of fisticuffs between the 41 and the 7. You had Ty Dillon finally making an impact on a race, at least late. We remember he was in the race, albeit this time for dumping Chase Briscoe. But yeah, there weren't exactly a lot of things as a handicapper that we looked at and went, you know what? We learned something here that we can apply going forward.
I'm going to go ahead and be the Denny Hamlin apologist. I would have to say that I don't have favorite drivers, or I really try to fight having a favorite driver. I think that objectivity is very important when it comes to making money betting this sport. But I will say that I probably do think that Kyle Larson, if I had to pick, would probably be my favorite driver. And I don't know. That's why I feel like I discovered him for some reason, even though I had literally nothing to do with it. I just,
yes,
betting on him.
You discovered him. You're responsible for Kyle Larson bursting onto the racing scene.
You know who wasn't impressed that I told him that was Kyle Larson. He's like, yeah, cool. Anyway, but if you're Denny Hamlin, I have no problem with what he did. I just don't. The goal is to win the race. And someone said, well, what if the roles were reversed and Denny Hamlin was on the outside and Kyle Larson was on the inside? I think Denny Hamlin wins the race. It doesn't matter how you slice it. Kyle Larson needs to get more aggressive on restarts. And until he does, we are going to sit there and I'm going to call him not clutch or whatever that means. He's just terrible at late race restarts. And I understand that he races guys with respect, and that's important. You want guys to race you with respect. But when you have 5 or 6 laps to go in the Cup Series, you got to go get it. And if someone makes a mistake, you better get your ass up there and get on his door, try to side draft him, and try to take the lead. And with that being said, I do think that his comments were hilarious. And I thought that he hit the nail on the head. It's that, Couch Racer, the Door Bumper Clear guys, had posted, for those of you that hate Denny Hamlin, what is it you don't like? Well, I quickly chimed in and said, well, he's quick to take, or, quick to place blame, but not very quick to take responsibility. And then it started to get like a lot of likes. I'm like, oh, great. I don't want Denny to see this and think I hate him. So then I make another comment that's like, by the way, I think Denny Hamlin's the most important guy in the sport right now. He started a race team. He's also competing for a championship. He is the voice of the driver. So with that being said, he is always right. And when Kyle Larson said that, he goes, oh, yeah, all of his friends, Denny's always right. Denny's always right. And I think Kyle Larson hit the nail on the head. But ultimately, I think Larson needs to sack up a bit, and he needs to start getting more aggressive on restarts. We've seen it time and time again. He's led a ton of laps at Homestead, loses on a restart. Whenever he leads a ton of laps, even when he had the lead at Darlington, I know that Ross kind of doored him, but ultimately he just got to be more aggressive. You have to go out there and win. No one's going to no one cares ultimately. You think Denny Hamlin is in victory lane going, oh man, I wish I didn't do that to Kyle Larson. No, he's taking a trophy home. So I have no problem with him racing aggressively. Now, it's a bummer that Kyle finished 21st because,
he fell like an absolute brick after his car got nicked up a little bit there, given that altercation.
I have an issue more with that, but and Denny says he doesn't touch him, and it's like, I don't know, Denny, we have eyes. Like, it looked like you touched him. Kyle said he touched him, and I don't know, like, how do you have drivers say, like, we didn't make contact, and someone saying, well, yeah, we did. Now,
Denny said he didn't make contact with Alex Bowman. Bowman said he did, and we had video of that showed it just looked like he disrupted the aero.
Agree with that. I agree. I think that Alex Bowman and his team were wrong in saying that Denny just got the air off the back spoiler, and I think he was kind of loose to begin with, and he kind of ended up in the wall. But I don't know. I just think Denny's easy to hate because he's vocal, but man, he's winning races, and that's what you have to do. You have got to win races. Now, Denny likes to not win races where he leads a bunch of laps. He likes to just come in and win late. So he's telling everybody he had the best car. I don't think he did. I think that if gun to his head, he says that Truex had a better car than him. But Denny had the microphone. Denny got the win. Denny has the podcast. So I guess Denny has to be right.
Hey, look, I mean, the 11 finds a way to get to victory lane, continues to improve his resume. It's a track now where he has the most career wins at Pocono, so he clearly feels comfortable there. And you just wonder, when push comes to shove, the 5 knows that he's going to have to crank up his level of aggression if he's going to go out there and win a championship. Maybe he's banking all of that goodwill, lulling the field to sleep, and going to find another gear when the races mean a heck of a lot more, with the playoffs inching ever so close. Other than the Hamlin-Larson drama, anything else that stood out to you? Or we can very easily wave the green-white checkered flag and get on to a little bit of NASCAR betting basics.
Yeah, I'd say we just move on to stage 2. I think it was kind of entertaining to see some of the other stuff that went on, but I don't think overly that important to what we're trying to do here.
Hey, the one thing I will say, good on NASCAR for not waving that caution flag early when the 41 got spun around. They at least allowed the race to play out.
Yep.
Now, I do wonder if the TV window hadn't run long and the first stage of the race didn't look a lot like the truckers more than anything else. If they would have done everything they can to extend the race and get us a whole lot of overtime restarts. But alas, they allow things to unfold the way they should have. It's a long enough track. They protected Priest. And let's be honest here, nobody was catching Denny on the final 2 turns there. The only thing that maybe could have been jostled for, at least as we watched the broadcast, was who finished second and third between Truex and Reddick in that regard. So on to stage 2 we go. But before we get there, we'll remind all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners, to follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you're a college football fan, all 11 college football preview shows have now been completed. We broke a Bet the Board record with the SEC breakdown, a shade less than 3 hours. We wanted to do our best impression of Oppenheimer. So, Worm, you have something to aspire to, and we do the Stay Green season preview with whatever illustrious guests we bring on. I'm going to need 3 hours of NASCAR goodness across all major series to try and be able to fill your shoes over there.
I think if we did trucks, Xfinity, and Cup in a weekend, I still think 3 hours would still be a stretch. I mean, I can't imagine.
Let's be honest here. We're going 6.5 minutes on trucks. We're going 12.5 minutes on Xfinity, and we could probably stretch out Cup if we wanted.
Yeah, could you imagine like breaking down like a Daniel Dye matchup? Like, I don't know. I just think it's like sometimes I send messages or bets to people, and like, I've never heard. I'm like, you don't need to. Like,
just bet it. Yeah, don't ask questions. Just bet the damn race, check the results, and the money will be in your account when this thing eventually they wave the checkered flag. And the truck races, though, it could take 6.5 hours later and 27 cautions for that to happen. But all right, on to stage 2. And I think talking trucks and Xfinity provides the perfect minor segue into the question that I have for you. And it's something that you brought to my attention on Sunday morning, because we obviously go back and forth. We know that the NASCAR markets aren't the most liquid. So head-to-head matchups at the most prominent books typically come up Saturday night. Unless something is completely egregious, you and I always like to wait until there's a little bit more liquidity in the market. We can hope that most books won't mirror one another. Prices come up, and then we can do our heavy lifting. But there weren't that many opportunities. And when you watch the board, there was one driver that saw a ton of money come in against him, and those bettors that had the foresight to do so were rewarded. They bet against your man crush number 2 in Kyle Busch with a couple of elite drivers. But I'll ask a question that is rather vague, and we can drill down accordingly into it is, do you feel that the NASCAR markets have gotten more efficient, not just through the course of this season, but over the years as there's more and more eyeballs that are gravitating towards NASCAR and betting the sport?
I think absolutely. I think there's even a difference from the beginning of the year till now, and there could be a couple reasons for that. But if we just look at the last couple races, and I guess I just want to talk about primarily outright markets at this point. If you look back at the last couple races, Pocono, New Hampshire, I'm going to throw out Atlanta just because that's not part of the, that's
not real racing. It's not real racing. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's not real racing.
Then you got Chicago Street, Nashville, Sonoma, and Gateway. If you look back at the cars that won those races, they were all top 3 favorites after practice and qualifying. And I think that right now, it just highlights how important it is to beat the market early in the week. If you end up, taking someone like I did last week, a little bit of Ross Chastain at 12-1, he goes out there and lays an egg in practice and qualifying and then goes off at 25-1. And now I'm sitting here staring at a ticket that I can't even trade for a bag of peanuts. And then I have 3 guys at 5-1 or better, to win this race. You're really behind the 8 ball because now you have to pick which guy's not going to make a mistake, because a mistake with this car is very costly. So if you look at New Hampshire, you have Martin Truex Jr. dust the field and was the clear favorite going into the race. Go to the Chicago Street Course. Now, SVG.
Hold on. One caveat, though, because I think you raise an excellent point. I don't want you to lose your train of thought, so keep that for a second. You mentioned Martin Truex being the overwhelming favorite, but at a lot of prominent shops, he was neck and neck with Christopher Bell going into Loudon.
Sure.
And Bell had a fast car, but Bell made those mistakes and wasn't able to recover the same way as the 19, who went out there, led all those laps, and didn't shoot himself in the foot despite countless restarts over the last 50 laps or so.
Yeah, that's why I think it's hard when you have, 2 or 3 guys that are kind of priced under 6-1, and they all look kind of similar in practice. You're trying to bet on the guy that's going to make the least amount of mistakes, and that's really, really hard. Obviously, there's all sorts of pit data and penalty data that we can take a look at, but to kind of continue down this the who's won and the prices in which they went off at after practice and qualifying. Someone say, well, SVG was 100-1. Yeah, well, SVG went off at like 9-1 before the race, after practice and qualifying. Yeah. Obviously, he was super fast in practice, so the books did a great job of adjusting there. But I'm not going to take a guy at 9-1 that's never run a NASCAR race before. Like, what he did was impressive, and hopefully we can see him. I don't think he'll do the same thing again next time. I mean, that would really be that'd be a blow, I feel like, to the NASCAR Cup Series if he comes out there and just wins the next race as well. But that's beside the point. You look at Nashville. Ross Chastain, I think, went off at less than 6-1, along with, I think, Truex and Reddick was kind of right there, along with Byron. All those guys were kind of like that 5 to 7-1 range. And then you go to Sonoma. I think that, and here's the thing. Truex was 40-1 before practice and qualifying based on Toyota's performance in, or at least I guess Gibbs' performance at COTA, and their performance last year on road courses. So yeah, there was a 40-1 available on Truex. He goes out there. I think he went off at like 7.5 or 8-1, but still, I think the first or second favorite at that race. And then you go all the way back to Gateway, where Kyle Busch, after practice and qualifying, he pulls it. I think he goes off at plus 550 or something, and then he goes out there and wins the race. So what I'm talking about here is right now, it seems like there's just a handful of guys week in and week out that can win races, and you're not getting guys at like this 12, 13, 14-1 range. You're looking at just and whether odds makers are doing a better job, or that's just the way that the races are playing out, or a combination of both. It just really, really highlights the fact that you better do a damn good job early in the week, kind of predicting where the market's going to go. Because if you don't, you're behind an 8 ball, and then you're trying to dodge a particular driver. Because you can't bet everybody at 5-1. You're going to have guys where there's going to be some liabilities, and that's why it's just so important to make sure you're picking off the best number. And by the way, there's a big difference between 4.5-1 and 5.5-1. It's not like 16-1 and 17-1. So it's really important that you're shopping and finding those best numbers throughout the entire week, not just early in the week, but right before the race. Because with odds this tight, every little bit counts. And I know that we've said that time and time again, but make sure you have multiple options and you're always able to price shop to make sure you're getting your money in good.
Exactly. And you mentioned implied probability and everything else that goes along with it. You're going to see a little bit of that this weekend in the Xfinity race when you shop around, and at least before practice and qualifying, when you look at some of the prices that are available on AJ Allmendinger, there is a hell of a lot of difference when you're doing this full time, plus 110 versus minus 110. Whereas I know a lot of recreational bettors go, oh, I feel like it's a much bigger drop off from 20-1 down to 12-1, but that couldn't be further from the case. And I don't want to bog the show down in discussing math and some of the minutia and everything else that comes along with it, but there's a lot that goes into it. And to your point, talking about some of the efficiency that we've seen in the outright market, I mean, you and I keep meticulous records for everything we do. And when I went through all my numbers after Pocono over the weekend, this year, I have the smallest percentage of the overall bets I've made in terms of money allocated towards the outright pool. 14% of all the volume that I've bet across motorsports is on outrights this year, with the lion's share, of course, being head-to-head. And years ago, when I first learned basically at your elbow and we were building cards, 90% of what we did was outrights because things weren't priced correctly. And the markets have progressively gotten more efficient, especially when you're looking at some of the larger limits that are available after you have those additional data points from practice, grid position and everything else. So unless we see a different strategy in play or some unique nuances there, a little bit tougher to land the long shots. And I think it's part of the reason why a lot of people that have access to it have taken full advantage of live betting opportunities for a track like Pocono, where odds makers are adjusting based on, what they think is unfolding before them, instead of, hey, this guy's going to take 2 tires, this guy's on a different strategy, which leads me into one thing that I do want to give credit to NBC, because I thought they did an excellent job in terms of laying out the strategy, and some of the scenarios were there, illustrating the fuel, which is extremely difficult as someone who listens to NASCAR races on radio in his car when he can't watch them in its entirety. I had no idea what the hell was going on once I left the house after stage 2.
Well, I think that, Steve Letart's a pro. I mean, he knows what's going on. And I think that, when you're talking about strategy, you're talking, especially at a place like Pocono, which is why I don't think that a lot of the stuff that, we can't really glean much from that race to turn around and try to make money in the future, because you're talking about like a guy only needing 7 seconds of fuel versus 9 seconds of fuel, right? If you need 10 seconds of fuel, you're putting 4 tires on. If you only need 7 seconds of fuel, you're probably only putting 2 tires on. If that's going to help you maintain your track position, you're not going to fall off as much. So, you have to have someone like Letart in the booth in order to help you out, or you have to have Larry Mack. If the other, not that I don't like the other guys, but they're just not capable of that information. If you're not Larry Mack or Steve Letart. And to your point, you talked about how Kyle Busch was kind of faded across the board. I do want to touch base on this. Now, if you want to look at this particular event, or this one race at Pocono, like, obviously he had a poor qualifying, but he was really fast in practice. And by the way, this is arguably his best track. At least it was when he was with Joe Gibbs. Now, did the setup transfer over with Randall Burnett and that crew? Obviously it did not. But obviously it cashed a bunch of tickets for people that faded him because he started so far behind. However, you look at a guy that I thought about fading at New Hampshire, kind of across the board. That guy was Joey Logano. He struggled in practice. You had Paul Wolf come in and say, we're trying a few things. We're not sure how it's going to work. But because it's so hard to pass in this car, you can steal track position. Like, Logano was able to kind of get into the top 5 late in the race, and he kind of stayed there. I think he finished 2nd in the race, or even 3rd in the race. So it's really, really hard, especially when strategy does play out at these tracks where there's not a lot of tire wear. You can take 2 tires or fuel only and maybe steal some track position. So just be careful when you're fading someone blindly across the board because someone's starting at the rear of the field, like a guy like AJ Allmendinger this week. Because he's starting deep in the field, they are going to be more aggressive with their strategy. And if they get lucky and get a caution, they're just going to inherit that track position. So I do think that, at certain times it is nice and profitable to be able to fade a guy completely across the board. But you just got to make sure that you know that with this car, and these guys are super talented, if someone gets track position, all of a sudden their car could come to life, and it's going to be really hard for you to win those 3 or 4 matchups you have against them.
Well, you mentioned track position, and I think track position will be an important handicapping portion of the equation when we go to Richmond this weekend, and it allows us to wave the green, white checkered flag on stage 3 as we head into the race preview. when you look at Richmond and some of the track specs, it's 3/4 of a mile, 1.21 kilometers for our Canadian friends, aka your wife out there listening to this fine show. A D-shaped asphalt racetrack located just outside Richmond, Virginia, known for high tire wear, 14-degree banking in the turns. When we talk about track comps, Wormser, this is where I always defer your level of expertise. I know a lot of people are going to talk about short, flat track ovals out there, but there are some unique variations on what you're going to get here. But at the same time, there are a number of drivers that'll race well at Phoenix, that'll race well at Loudon, that'll perform really well at Richmond, most notably Kevin Harvick, Martin Truex, amongst others. But when you're looking at track comps, do you use anything else in your calculations that you'll place a high value quotient on, or is Richmond its own standalone entity?
Man, I used to kind of lump New Hampshire and Phoenix with Richmond, but the more, we learn, I mean, New Hampshire, they had a new tire and they were kind of testing that, and they thought that there would be more fall off, and then there was hardly any fall off at all. And there's going to be tire fall off at Richmond. Same with Phoenix. I think that, it's a different tire than New Hampshire. So obviously Goodyear thinks it's very different. And I think that the speeds at Phoenix obviously are much different, much more smooth and less fall off. So I think it's important to just know who's really good at Richmond and who's good at conserving tires. And, it is the same tire as Phoenix and the same tire as North Wilkesboro, which is kind of interesting because if you look at who was really good at North Wilkesboro and who won at Richmond, it was both Kyle Larson. So I think that you kind of have to take all of that information together. But ultimately, I think if you're going to take one specific thing and say, hey, this is what's most important, I think you have to look at obviously the race from earlier this year, but also what happened when it was hot and slick in the difference from last spring to last fall, because there was a big difference in the amount of passing that went on. You had Denny win in the spring, and then you had Kevin Harvick win in the fall. So who's able to kind of transition better to that higher tire wear when it's warmer? And I think you're going to see similar guys that were good in the spring here, but also the guys that were good in the fall here last year.
And you mentioned recent winners, spring this year. Kyle Larson was the one that got to victory lane. The fall last year, it was Kevin Harvick, a race that we saw in person. Denny Hamlin in the spring race. And in 2021, albeit before they went to the next-gen car, it was Martin Truex Jr. getting to victory lane in the fall, and Alex the Showman Bowman winning the race in the spring. When we get into some of the drivers to watch, we can start at the top of the board. We talked a little bit about the efficiency in the market post-practice. Apparently, odds makers don't want to give away cookies early on this week with the 19 because at most books, he's priced less than 4-1. However, I did see some plus 450 out there, and the early bird who catches the worm was able to grab a little bit of 5. When we talk about the 19 as a car to watch, he backed up his win at New Hampshire with a third-place finish at Pocono. You said it at the top that you could make the case that he was arguably faster than Denny Hamlin. Scored points in the first 2 stages and led 20 laps. He now has 6 top 5 finishes and 2 wins in the past 8 races. And when we talk about track history at Richmond, he went off at 11-1 in the spring. It's a far cry from where the number is right now, but he's got 8 top 10 finishes in his last 9 starts here. And when you look at the 3 wins he's accumulated since the spring of 2019, since joining Joe Gibbs Racing, 11th, 7th, 4th, 1st, 5th, 2nd, 1st. Since 2016, he started outside the top 10 here just 2 times. So he's qualified well and finished well. Martin Truex obviously justified as the short favorite.
Yeah, and I made the argument last week with Derek that I thought that Truex wasn't going to be as good at Pocono because I thought we had seen speed out of Truex last year and earlier in the season, and still wasn't that great last year at Pocono. Well, I was wrong because now Truex has the fastest car week in and week out. He unloads fast. He qualifies well. He practices well. They make the proper adjustments. They stay on the best strategy. And oh, by the way, Martin Truex Jr. is a really talented driver. So this could be a deep playoff run for this team. I think if you're going to sit there and say who the favorite should be, it's got to be Martin Truex Jr. This is a great track for him. The only downside, I think, that the only chink that he has in his armor would be his ability to kind of work his way back to the field if he makes a mistake. I think that, he does get a little angry on the radio. Him and James Small, like I've said, I think week in and week out, they do have kind of this like marriage type relationship where they get very emotional on the radio. And they do a great job of adjusting that car in clean air, but sometimes they'll struggle to get back to the lead if they've made great adjustments for clean air and they find themselves kind of back in the pack. So other than that, I just don't expect them to slip up. They're going to have to. I just don't know how this team doesn't run in the top 3. I can't imagine even a poor qualifying. I can't imagine him getting over 5.5 to 1. In poor qualifying for him would probably be a 12th place, qualifying run. So at this point, I'm not, even though I think Truex is going to be there, I mean, I'm not going to take him at plus 375 because if they have one mistake or there's an untimely caution during green flag stops, he's going to find himself back in traffic. And I just don't think he's as talented as some other drivers that have good cars. When they get back in traffic, other drivers find their way to the front a little bit better than Truex does, but he's going to be really good.
How much shorter can this number realistically get? If Truex goes out there and has the fastest car in practice and sits on the pole, I mean, can we see a scenario where odds makers would be willing to drop his price below 3 to 1? I mean, we haven't seen that yet in the next gen car.
Yeah.
That's Kevin Harvick vintage Phoenix when he used to go off at prices around 9 to 5.
I wouldn't be shocked if we did see some plus 275 at some shops. I can't imagine him painted across the board below 3 to 1. I feel like right now this price has a front row starting spot baked into it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I can't see a number like that. But I don't know. It depends on how good he looks in practice. When Truex wins usually it's a dominant fashion, and I think odds makers know that, and I think the rest of the field knows that as well.
No, it's a fair assessment. I mean, he starts out front, stays out front, and doesn't allow anybody to get the best of him. So
I will say this, though. Whenever you have a car that's super dominant like that, and you do find yourself at a track where strategy could play, you're going to have instead of
someone's going to take a shot. Someone's going to take a shot.
And it might be a faster car, right? Because usually it's the guys in 15th to 20th place that are trying to take a shot. Well, if you're Denny Hamlin and you're running 8th and you're like, well, we really don't, the difference between 8th and 12th for us, there's 12 cars in the lead lap. Like, it's only going to cost us 4 points. Let's try this. Well, now you've got it. Now Truex, instead of dealing with Chris Buescher, who's, taking a risk and staying out on strategy, now you're dealing with Denny Hamlin. And those are two completely different guys to deal with. So if he's so good to where the whole field's like, how the hell are we going to beat this guy? Then you're going to get better drivers trying a new strategy. And that's a completely different animal than someone that's like a 15th place car trying to beat a first place car. If you got a 5th or 6th place guy that actually takes a chance and it hits, Truex could have his hands full. But until then, I just don't see it happening. I don't know. I think he's going to be really good.
Well, you mentioned a driver that took a shot with strategy. I mean, Denny Hamlin's been known to short pit, and there's a reason at one of his 2 de facto home tracks, Denny Hamlin's odds to win this weekend are a shade less than 6 to 1. And when we look at the 11's current form, one for a track record 7th time at Pocono, like we talked about at the top of the show, and for his 50th time in the Cup Series. He's now 3rd in the regular season standings. And to his credit, he hasn't made mistakes. The pit crew hasn't made mistakes. They've really cleaned things up lately. First top 5, though, over his last 4 races. So he hasn't exactly been the model of consistency. Now, when we look at track history at Richmond, he was a runner-up in both races in 2021, and that includes leading 207 laps in the spring and 197 more in the fall. He won the 2022 spring race and 4th in the summer to tally 11 top 6 finishes in his last 14 Richmond starts. And maybe the only reason that he's not 12 for 14 is the fact that he had troubles on pit lane in the spring. Hamlin won the second stage, led 71 laps, but his final penalty came late, and he wasn't able to overcome it. When we look at the 11, Virginia is for lovers. Denny may not fall into that bucket. Do you love him this weekend?
I mean, I think Denny's going to be really good for sure. But, this is what happens with Denny. He runs really, really well at Pocono. I don't think he had the best car, but he claims he did. But they didn't make any mistakes, and he finds himself in victory lane. And you go back and you look at some of the other places where he's had really good cars, and they just keep making. I mean, I thought the first, 60 laps at Loudon, it looked like he was the car to beat. Makes one mistake, finds himself back in 18th, repassing a bunch of cars he had to, and that's where I have a problem with this price on Denny. If you were to tell me that Denny's not going to have any issues all day, then I think 5.5 or 6 to 1 is a really good price on that 11 car, especially if we get long green flag runs. However, that's just not the way that this team operates. They love to make mistakes, and it cost them the race earlier this year. It also cost them the race at Martinsville. In the races where I thought that Denny Hamlin had the best cars where he didn't win, were both Richmond and Martinsville earlier this year. And he was able to take control of those races, meaning he was leading with fresh tires, or at least when the caution came out, when everyone was going to pit, he was going to be the leader. And he made mistakes. He made mistakes both times. And, then he goes out to a place where he was, a top 3 car and is able to kind of steal a win at Pocono. So at 5.5 to 1, I think that because there will be a mistake, I think if you're going to bet Denny, I'd like to see a wait till live. Maybe you'll get like a 10 or 11 to 1 on him. I know that some of that was available at Pocono. So I would wait till live on Denny Hamlin. Truex, you could wait till live, but if Truex gets out to the lead, he's going to go from, plus 375 to 2 to 1 to even money to minus 150 in a hurry.
We can break up the Toyota processional with a Chevrolet driver here, and Kyle Larson right around 7 to 1. You're looking at the 5 car who's hunting his first points victory since Martinsville. I know he won at North Wilkesboro in the All-Star race and dusted the field, but you talked about his inability to get good restarts and show some of that aggression it's going to take. Obviously, the 20th place finish does not reflect exactly how strong he was last weekend at Pocono. When you're talking about Kyle Larson, he's accumulated the second most points scored on short tracks this season as well. One here in the spring, leading 93 laps, but just 2 top 5 finishes in his last 9 Richmond starts. And short, flat ovals have not exactly been synonymous with Kyle Larson dominance by any stretch of the imagination, but the 5 could be coming into his own on this track type, and some of that's reflected in this particular market number.
Well, we know he's going to have short run speed. He's going to qualify well, and he's certainly going to be a player for the first 25 or 30 laps of a run. The thing with him is Kyle Larson and Cliff Daniels and this team, are they going to be able to stay ahead of the track so that way that 5 team doesn't fall off like they have historically? And if he's out there in clean air and he can manage his stuff, I certainly think that Kyle could get it done. However, if he starts to fall back in traffic, or he starts to struggle, or starts to lose a little bit of grip, he tends to drop like a rock at these high tire wear places where typically the bottom is the fastest way around. If you go to a place like Darlington or Homestead where you can kind of switch up the groove a little bit, he's obviously super talented. And this is actually a good price on Kyle Larson. We haven't seen him be the 3rd or 4th favorite in a while, at least consistently. So, is this the point of the season where maybe we're starting to see a little value on him? Yeah, maybe, because he does have some solid finishes. Outside of Pocono last week, I would say 5 of his last 6 races have all been in the top 10, and he hasn't had great cars. I think if you give Kyle Larson a really, really good car and you don't end up on a late race restart, I think 7 to 1 is not a bad price on this kid.
Well, you mentioned value, and this was a driver that I had my eyes on coming into the weekend, but odds makers were one step ahead. That, of course, being the 20 car of Chris Bell. Current form, 6th place at Pocono, did end a 3-race run of 18th or worse finishes. Talked about how his finish in New Hampshire, not exactly indicative of the kind of machine he was driving. Finished 4th here back in the spring, but you look at the 5 results he's been able to put together at Richmond as a member of JGR, none worse than 6th. And his last 2 finishes most impressive since he drove through the field with her horrific starting position, both at 21st. Driver rating 108 plus and 4 out of 5 Richmond trips. But again, 8 to 1 for Christopher Bell. I just haven't seen enough from him week in, week out, Worm, that has me running to the window betting him at this price, whereas my tune would have been a lot different at 12 or 14.
No, he's priced like he's won multiple races this year. Like he's won 1 race, but that was a dirt track. So, everyone for some reason is afraid of Chris Bell. And listen, I understand that he's a super talented driver, short flats. He was really good at Loudon, but he wasn't good enough to drive back through the field, and he got passed by Truex kind of early in that run. I want to say in the first 5 to 10 laps, Truex had passed Chris Bell and kind of established himself as the fastest guy. And then Bell never got it back. I don't even know that he got back to the top 5 that day. And usually that's a place where you're able to get it done if you have a fast car. So Richmond, again, is just another animal. You can certainly save your tires towards the end of the run, and I think that Chris Bell has done a great job of that. I think that him and Denny kind of have this, we're going to run long and then be good on the back half of the next run. But right now, I just think he's a little overvalued. He's priced like he's won a bunch of races. And I think he's only been the fastest car. I don't even know that he's been the fastest car this year. So until I see that, especially when you have Truex in the mix, like Truex is going to qualify in the top 3. Where's Chris Bell's price going? Maybe 6-1. I'd rather see him unload super fast and then take that price versus the 8-1 right now.
No, it makes sense instead of rolling the dice early. Whereas if Bell was going to have a slip up and have to race through the field, maybe this number does go on the drift and makes it a lot more intriguing value as a proposition to try and add to your race day portfolio. Kevin Harvick, when we look at his prices, 9-1 on the low end. I have seen some rogue shops offer up 10. Finished 4th at Pocono 1 week after finishing 4th at New Hampshire. The back-to-back 4th place finishes ended a stretch of 6 races where he finished outside the top 10. His average finish slightly better than 5th on short flat tracks this season's always been one of his strengths. And when you look at how Harvick has performed at this particular racetrack, won his 2nd race last season here and finished 5th in April, the 2nd and 5th in this last 2 spring races. 9 of his last 10 trips here, all resulting in placement inside the top 10, only outside the top 10 twice since becoming a member of Stewart-Haas Racing.
Well, quietly putting together solid runs with fast race cars. I thought that last week that qualifying at Pocono was really impressive. For him, I think he led, I think Group B was like the fastest car in the first round of qualifying, which is something we have not seen out of him in a while. He's had fast race cars. He had fast car at Nashville, fast car at New Hampshire. Obviously, Chicago Street, he just punted on. But I think he's putting together quietly a really, really good season. If someone makes a mistake, he can be there to win. And if there's a track where Harvick's going to get it, it's going to be here. It's going to be Michigan. But again, we're not going to know whether Kevin Harvick's good or not until like 30 or 40 laps into the 2nd or 3rd run, right? He doesn't just unload and just, oh man, we've got a rocket this week. They're not at the top of the board in practice. Usually they just have Kevin's looking for something in the car, some comfortability. Childers usually finds it and they say, yeah, we're going to be decent today. But like I said, it's usually a long run type car. So I'm not even going to judge Kevin Harvick until, the 2nd or 3rd run and, not till 30 laps into that 2nd or 3rd run.
You may know in practice if you were there watching. I mean, you'll be able to tell if he's sticking that lower line and he's able to try and be able to put his left side tires right there along the yellow at Richmond. Unfortunately for us, we won't be there to see it in person. When I look at the next tier of drivers, 3 household names, obviously all in that kind of 10-1 to 12-1 range. And that trio that I think are worth discussing, William Byron, current form, 24th last week, now trails Truex by 31 points for the regular season title. Started from the pole, led 60 laps, did not score points in the first 2 stages, largely due to pit strategy. When we look at Kyle Busch, current form, never really had handling of his car at Pocono. We talked about him being faded across the board. Track history, as far as Richmond is concerned, was 14th here in the spring, but my bigger concern is he came out and said that RCR just hasn't had the same short track program to give him the kind of speed he needs, and that's kind of shown up in a limited sample size thus far. And then, of course, there's Joey Logano, who wins stage 1, showed speed at Pocono, ends up crashing out after being shuffled to the back. If you haven't had a chance to listen to his in-car audio, absolutely priceless. I don't think Joey knew that the mics were picking all of that up, as you could see the fiery side and the competitor that we've grown accustomed to in the 22. When you look at how he's raced at Richmond, top 7 finishes in 5 of 6 trips. Most importantly, though, he's amassed a driver rating of 112 plus in 4 of his last 6. The 22 should be a force to be reckoned with. We've seen him move in early week betting, but of those 3 drivers, feel free to add a nugget or 2 to that trifecta.
Yeah, I think that my favorite, outright price at this point in the week is probably William Byron at 10-1. I mean, he qualifies really well. He's had speed week in and week out. I know that, 2 of the last 3 races, he's been spectacular, leading laps, and that pit crew is kind of a weapon. If he has a good pit stall, he'll pick up spots on every single time down pit road. I certainly think that Willie B is kind of setting himself up for a championship run, and 10-1 for a guy that could easily go out there and pull it and run, top 3 to 5 all day. I don't think that's a bad price at all. And by the way, he's also doing a great job of hanging around. And I think that that's really important to, winning NASCAR races over the long run. I mean, if you take yourself out of the race with a penalty or by tearing up cars, it just decreases your chance of being there at the end. And he's been able to be there at the end multiple times and win races. And I say that as a jaded bettor of someone that has not taken Willie B a bunch this year. But I certainly do like this price at 10-1. I think that could only go down. I can't imagine Willie B going off at 14 or 15-1. I don't care how bad he looks in practice. I just don't see it. So I think that price is only going one direction. Kyle Busch, I think this price could go in the other direction. He's also a guy I just can't figure out. He looked great in practice last week and had great comments about his car, qualified poorly, and just never had a chance. And, that it was kind of a full team effort for them to screw up that race. I mean, the pit stops were slow. I mean, he's pitting last week. He's pitting to stay on the lead lap. And, if you're outside of 12 seconds, you could lose a lap if you're at Pocono trying to stay on the lead lap and undercut the stage. Well, then they have a 17-second pit stop and he goes down a lap. It's like this, they just can't kind of get it together. And they just haven't shown speed on the short tracks. I know that he was really, really good at Gateway, but that's a completely different type of racing. I don't think that I'd be shocked if he went off at lower than 10-1. I just don't anticipate him. He just doesn't have speed. Like, you need speed in your race car. Like, Truex came on and said it right before last
Newsflash, you need speed in race cars.
You just need speed. Like, sometimes they have handling, but not speed. Like, you don't want to have to worry about speed. Speed should just be there week in and week out. Speed is there for the 19 every week. Speed is there for the 24 every week. So those are the two guys on speed that are always good. Kyle doesn't have that. And if you marry that with a poor handling race car, Kyle turns into a little bitch out there, and he will be just a miserable human being for an entire afternoon. So I'm not high on him at 10. And then Logano, I mean, he's some places up to 16-1. I mean, I don't hate that at all. This is Joey Logano. He's won twice. He was unreal last year in the fall. Could have easily won the race. He didn't qualify well, but he was able to make a lot of passes early on. I don't think he's going to qualify well, but he's also a guy that, man, he just figures out a way to get a good finish. And if you're constantly finishing better than your average running spot, you're doing a hell of a job as a driver. And he's a guy that's been doing that. I don't really like the 11-1, but some of those 16-1s aren't terrible prices.
When we start to get into the teens, there's one driver that stands out. It's the most popular one in all of NASCAR, a guy that got a little bit of my money last week when his number drifted out to 30. Never really had a chance to win the race, but I thought it was a good value proposition. Was competitive in terms of a finish, but still has his work cut out for him, since now I'm not sure he can point his way into the playoffs. He better win one of these upcoming races. That, of course, being Chase Elliott, who's 59 points short of the cut line. When you look at his track history, he didn't race here in the spring. It was Josh Berry in his car who actually used strategy to get his car up front. 3 top 5 finishes, however, though, over his last 5 trips to Richmond. Ryan Blaney, 4 finishes of 30 or worse in his last 6 races. His number all the way on the drift out to 21-1. And he's really struggling of late. 1 finish better than 10th at this track. He does have 2 finishes of exactly 10th. And he's struggled traditionally with higher tire wear tracks. And then a guy that I think a lot of people look at and go, man, we don't see him priced like this all that often, of course, being Tyler Reddick at 30-1. Another top 6 finish after coming home 6th at New Hampshire. He was 2nd last week at Pocono. But as far as track history at Richmond is concerned, he's never finished inside the top 10. His last 3 chips here in the next-gen car, 16th, 31st, and 12th. A little bit problematic when you know how well Toyotas have run here in the past. So those 3 trio of drivers. Anything of interest or note to the Wormser pre-week thoughts?
So Chase Elliott, I would say if you're going to do anything with Chase Elliott, stay away from him in matchups and stay more on like the outright and the higher payout stuff. I think that if they're going to win a race, it's going to have to be on a strategy or a kind of a lucky caution. So make sure you're getting paid out on that. Obviously the matchups depend on who he's matched up against, but I just think that they just don't have speed. It seems like they're just a little bit off and not really into it. They're going to have to win a race in order to get into the playoffs. So I expect them to be super aggressive with their strategy, heavy risk reward, and hopefully that 9 team can find themselves in victory lane. Everyone wants to see them in the playoffs, as do I. I think it'd be great. Ryan Blaney, man, how the hell did he go out there and kick everyone's ass in the Coke 600 and then just disappear? Like it was like, oh, Blaney found something, and then nothing. His finishes have been atrocious since then. So, and you're not going to make a point. The hotter, the slicker the track. I mean, when you look at Loudon, I thought he was going to struggle at Loudon because there's going to be tire fall off. And I'll be damned if there just wasn't that much fall off. So that's why I thought Ryan Blaney ran good at Loudon. I do not anticipate that same thing at Richmond. There's going to be much more tire fall off at Richmond. And, when he starts to kind of throw out that parachute in the back, he goes straight to the back. And I kind of anticipate more of that out of Ryan Blaney. But he's also a guy that if he looks good, I have no problem putting a little bit on him. If he looks decent in practice, you get him at 16, 17 to 1. I like having my money on Ryan Blaney, and hopefully he can kind of stay out front. He'll have to stay out front though, because he doesn't drive through the field at a place like Richmond. When it comes to Tyler Reddick, I mean, he just hasn't finished in the top 10 there. That's just crazy to think. But if someone were to come up to me and say, hey, I like Tyler Reddick at 30 to 1 this week, I don't even have to know the track. I'd go, oh, okay. Like, I'm okay with Tyler Reddick. You liking Tyler Reddick at 30 to 1. I think he's a talented guy. If the high line comes in, maybe this guy's going to be fast, but probably properly priced. But if you're just out of principle, I'm taking a top driver on a top team. I have no problem with that.
If there are a couple of top drivers who we've talked at great lengths about so far this season, it's the pair of Trackhouse teammates that I want to hit on here briefly. Ross Chastain, 21 to 1. Daniel Suarez at 60 to 1. Chastain has a win. He's into the playoffs, but you wouldn't know that given what we've seen from him on a week in, week out basis. Daniel Suarez has his work cut out for him, and I did appreciate his comments when he finished 36 last weekend. Said you get what you deserve when you're back here mixing it up amongst the squirrels. Trackhouse, what the hell is going on there? And how do you handicap these guys? Don't need a deep dive there, but definitely wanted to mention them before, I pick your brain real quick on a couple long shots.
So at first, when I looked at openers at Westgate, I knew, Ross opened at 25. He had a pretty good average running position here last year. And I'm like, do I pull the trigger on this? A little jaded from the week before, thinking I was getting my money in good at 12 to 1. And then I went back and watched the race. And you got to remember, we didn't have practice in qualifying in the first Richmond race. So that's the race I'm referring to. And so he started, I think, in the top 4 or the first 2 rows due to just the way that the points kind of kicked out how they were going to start. And he didn't really pass anybody all day, just kind of hung around, which is why he kind of had that average running position of between like 4 and 6. But he was never a threat to win the race. There were cars that were passing him consistently, the 19, the 24, the 5. And so I think he just kind of hung out and just took advantage of a solid finish. So, last year in this race, I think he put it on the pole or at least qualified first or second, and he didn't stay up there very long. So although at 25 to 1's a decent price, if you look at their finishes, though, I mean, it's just been brutal. He's brutal last week at Pocono, brutal at New Hampshire, Atlanta, Chicago. Obviously, that is 1 win in Nashville, Sonoma 10th, Gateway 22nd, Charlotte 22nd, Darlington 29th. I mean, these are rough finishes.
That's bad for the way he's being priced right now. I mean, if you took the one off the car and you just looked at his recent run, I mean, this is a driver that shouldn't be anywhere close to where he's being priced.
Yeah, I agree. So, now the cool thing, the problem with this, if he looks really good in practice and qualifying, he's going to go off at like 6 to 1. Right. So like they're quick to move his price because he's gone out there and he's won races and people are talking about him. So now Suarez, I don't know what to think with this guy. Like sometimes he needs to be good and he's terrible. Other times he's terrible and he's good. I tweeted out, I do think that if he says he's comfortable with his car, that he is going to be good. But, last week's a little bit of an anomaly. He gets caught up in, back with the squirrels, which I just think is a hilarious dig on the other guys back there. But he's tough. And I'm always going to wait on Suarez, at least from now on. I thought that price last week, that plus 140 for a top 10, I thought was just a gift of a price. And then we don't even make it to stage 1. If you're going to
do things and you're going to lose bets, you may as well finish 36th instead of finishing 11th.
Yeah, that's true.
To your credit, you were at least able to bookend the field. A top 5 with Denny Hamlin, who wins the thing outright, and a top 10 with Daniel Suarez, who finishes dead last. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. Speaking of, value propositions and potential long shots, I mean, SHR has been a downright dumpster fire for all drivers not named Kevin Harvick. But when you look at the short flat tracks, this is where they've shown a little bit of promise. And I'm not advocating for Chase Briscoe to go out there, light the world on fire, but at 90 to 1, you've got my attention with the 14 and Ryan Preece north of 100 to 1. He did win the pole at Martinsville, was 12th in Phoenix, 18th here, 17th in Dover. And the only reason he didn't finish better than the 15th in Martinsville was an issue on pit road that cost him track position. Can I interest you in a little bit of a Cinderella story in the 14 or the 41?
No, you can't. I just don't. I mean, they just they haven't shown speed. I see the finishes, but those are very early in the season. They've regressed. I don't think that these guys are. Something's not right with those teams in my opinion. They're just not firing on all cylinders. I mean, we're talking about Chase Briscoe. He made it to the final 8 last year and was leading at Martinsville to make his way to Phoenix. And I just am kind of shocked at kind of the backwards motion of both those guys. And I think Ryan Preece had some really tough shoes to fill. Not that Cole Custer's shoes were filled, but the expectation was so high on him going into the season that they thought he was going to come out there and potentially win a race this year. And it's just not super realistic when you haven't been in a cup car full time before. So I don't know. I mean, if you want to, no, I'm not interested in either one of those guys. Those are like the guys I look to fade. Like, who is going to be matched up against Chase Briscoe and Ryan Preece, so that way I can rush to bet against them.
I mean, look, this may not be the week that I'm running to fade him. If they're completely disrespected, I unfortunately may have to value bet or dabble a little bit on the 14 if he's matched up against some of the aforementioned squirrels at the back of the field.
We have to start talking about that. Yeah, I would say that Suarez was talking about these guys. I'm back here with the squirrels. He's talking about the 41 and the 14.
I mean, you have to remind yourself, though, that Daniel Suarez is on the outside looking into the playoff picture himself.
That's true, yeah.
So, I mean, he may not exactly be an apex predator right now in terms of the way he should be viewed in the Cup Series. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow Bet the Board Podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And as we remind all of our loyal listeners, I know they may not be happy necessarily with when we post our race day best bets. It's all about liquidity in the market and when we're able to get that up on the site to try and give you the most actionable element. But we do like you to get your beaks a little bit wet early in the week with a smaller position in the best bet portion of the program. Wormser, where are you taking us? There's only one way to go but up. We can't finish dead last 2 weeks in a row with the podcast best bet.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to stay chalky, though. I'm going to stick with my boy Denny Hamlin, top 5. I think he's anywhere from like minus 110 to minus 140 in places for the top 5. And here's why. I think that I like Denny Hamlin more than I like Martin Truex Jr. for that top 5 price because I think he recovers a little bit better. Now, if Denny makes a mistake early in the race, it won't be an issue. If he does have one of those things where he decides to speed on pit road on the last pit stop, there's nothing we can do about that. The other reason I like Denny Hamlin is he's really good on super long runs, and they're able to pick up time. He's able to make time on the back end of the next run at the end of the first run. I know that sounds a little confusing, but he's really, really good at that. And Gabe Hart and him, I think, have that plan. And I anticipate them to use that again this week, and that's how he's going to get his track position. So I like Denny Hamlin. He's super strong here. So I like Denny Hamlin, top 5. I'm going to stay super chalky.
Look at you going with chalk. We're going to have to go a little bit off the reservation then on Sunday.
Yeah,
we try and find an opportunity. But
well, do you want me to give like Allmendinger pole bet?
I mean, no, I don't think that would be a good bet, but it is offered at some books if you look around. But, I would tell you, if you want a Cinderella story, I mean, I wouldn't rule out, a little bit of SHR nibble to win the pole there. If the 14 or the 41 puts it all together, to see what you're able to make work. But Denny Hamlin, go ahead.
Don't bet AJ Allmendinger to win the pole. He's not practice or qualifying. He's running the Xfinity race. He's starting dead last. So that was a joke. I don't need a Twitter DM.
Oh, you're catching a stray. You're going to catch a stray.
I don't want someone to be like,
oh my God, Worm said Allmendinger to win the pole.
Yeah.
You're shilling for a sports book is what you're doing over there, trying to advocate such bad money management. But all right, my friend, we've done enough damage. Good to get back in the host chair. Like I said at the top of the show, thanks to Derek Yoder for filling in admirably over the last 2 weeks. I feel a lot better that if I need to take a mental health break from you, Chris, that the show must go on and that Stay Green will not miss a beat. So from Richmond Raceway this weekend, we want to wish all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners, the best of luck with all of your wagers. Check the Bet the Board podcast website for any updates on Sunday. But in the meantime, with a Denny Hamlin ticket in hand, swallow the chalk, as per Chris Werme, really going outside his comfort zone this weekend. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.